The day Travis and his wife drove that old pickup truck through town, with 200 ducks crammed in wooden crates in the bed. People didn't just stare. They laughed. Old men leaning on fence posts outside the feed store, women calling out from their front porches, kids running alongside the truck just to point and holler. One neighbor, a man who had raised cattle his whole life, shouted from across the field, "Travis, did you lose your mind or did you sell it?" And Travis just kept driving. Windows down, gravel dust behind him, 200 ducks quacking so loud you could hear them from 3 fields away. Nobody in that town believed in him. Not yet. Before we get into this story, if you enjoy stories like this one, take just a second and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely mean that. Every time I read through the comments and see someone from a small town in Mississippi, a farm in Iowa, a suburb in Texas, it reminds me why these stories matter. So tell me where you're from, I'll be reading. Now let's go back to the beginning. Travis Caldwell was 34 years old. He lived on a small family farm in the rural lowlands of southern Louisiana, a place where the land was flat, the air was thick with humidity, and life moved slowly, the way it had for generations. Most mornings, Travis was up before the sun. Not because he loved mornings, but because the fields didn't wait, the animals didn't wait, and the debt especially, didn't wait. He had the kind of face that looked tired even when he smiled. Deep-set eyes, calloused hands, a quiet way of speaking that made people underestimate him. He was not loud. He was not the kind of man who walked into a room and demanded attention. But he noticed things. He noticed how the floods came earlier every year, how the soil shifted, how the land his father had farmed for decades was slowly, quietly becoming less productive. He noticed all of this while everyone else just kept doing what they'd always done. Travis had a wife named Diane. She was 31. Steady, practical, the kind of woman who could stretch a grocery budget further than most people thought possible and still find something to laugh about at the dinner table. They had 2 children, a daughter, 8 years old, who already helped with chores before school, a son, 5 years old, who mostly got in the way in the most wonderful way possible. The 4 of them lived in a modest house, brick on the outside, a tin roof that rattled when the storms came through hard, a small backyard garden that Diane kept with a kind of quiet pride. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't desperate either. Until the year the cattle market collapsed. Travis had always raised a small beef cattle operation. It was what his father did. It was what the neighbors did. It was simply what people did on farms in this part of Louisiana. But after 2 bad seasons, 1 drought, then 1 flood, and with beef prices dropping to almost nothing at the local livestock auction, Travis sat down one evening at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. Diane sat across from him, helping their son with dinner. The lamp flickered. Outside, tree frogs called out in the dark. Travis opened the notebook and wrote down 3 words at the top of the page. Something has to change. He wasn't looking to get rich. He just wanted to give his kids a real chance. He wanted Diane to stop doing calculations in her head every time she went to the grocery store. He wanted to sleep without that low hum of financial dread that had lived in his chest for the past 3 years. He wanted stability, and he was willing to work harder than anyone to find it. The question was, what would that look like? The answer didn't come to Travis quickly. He spent weeks researching, reading whatever he could find online and at the county library, talking to people at the farmer's market, asking questions that his neighbors thought were just plain strange. "Why are you asking about ducks?" one older farmer said, half amused. "You're a cattle man, Travis. Your daddy was a cattle man, his daddy too." "Exactly," Travis said quietly. He had read about integrated duck farming, a method where ducks are raised alongside crops on wet, low-lying land. The ducks eat pests, slugs, and weeds. Their droppings fertilize the soil naturally, and then the ducks are sold for meat and eggs through local markets and restaurants. It wasn't a brand new idea, but in his community, nobody was doing it at scale. Travis thought, why not? When he brought it up to Diane, she didn't laugh. She tilted her head. She thought about it. "How many ducks are we talking about?" she asked. 200, he said. She was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot of ducks." "Yes," he said. The money was the first problem. Starting a duck operation at that size required capital they didn't have. Travis went to his local bank. He was turned down. He applied for a small USDA farm loan. The paperwork was slow, and the amount approved was only a fraction of what he needed. He considered selling his remaining cattle, that would cover part of it, but Diane was worried. If the ducks don't work, she said, we have nothing to fall back on. If the cattle stay, Travis said, we already have nothing moving forward. He sold the cattle. He borrowed the rest from his brother-in-law in Houston, a man who worked in logistics and knew nothing about farming but knew Travis, and that was enough. And then the town found out. The gossip moved fast the way gossip always does in small places. Travis sold his cattle for what? Ducks. How many? 200. Silence and then laughter. But here's what the town didn't know. While everyone was laughing, Travis was studying. He had connected with the Louisiana State University Ag Center, a free agricultural extension service that helps farmers learn new methods. He drove out there twice. He sat in on a webinar series. He took notes in that same battered notebook. He learned about water management, about feeding schedules, about protecting ducks from predators at night, hawks, foxes, raccoons, about which breeds grew fastest and laid the most eggs in southern climates. He came home each time with pages of handwritten notes, and Diane would read them alongside him at the kitchen table after the children were asleep. Nobody in town knew any of this. They only knew about the ducks. But there was something else, something even Diane didn't fully understand yet. One evening, while looking at an aerial map of their property on his laptop, Travis noticed something he had always known but never really thought about. Their land sat in a low-lying basin ground that flooded more severely than most surrounding farms during hurricane season and heavy spring rains. For cattle, this had always been a curse. Every flood season they'd lost feed, fences went down, spent weeks managing stressed animals stuck in the mud. But for ducks, Travis leaned closer to the screen and stared at that basin. For ducks, a flood might not be a curse at all. The first weeks with the ducks were chaos. Pure feathered quacking chaos. The kids thought it was the greatest thing that had ever happened. Their daughter, who had been quietly helping with calves for years, suddenly had 200 new, deeply chaotic responsibilities. She would chase them across the yard in the mornings, arms wide, laughing and hollering. Even the 5-year-old found a sense of purpose, though his version of helping mostly made things worse. Diane, for her part, threw herself into it completely. She built a feeding schedule. She tracked which birds seemed healthy and which were lagging. She started keeping her own notebook. Travis watched his wife and felt something move in his chest. This, he thought, this is what working together actually looks like. But the worry never fully left. 3 of the ducks died in the first week. A predator got in one night, a raccoon, Travis figured, and took 2 more before he reinforced the enclosure with hardware cloth and a hot wire. By the end of the first month, they were down to 188 birds. 12 ducks gone. He sat on the back porch that evening, elbows on his knees, staring at the enclosure. Diane came and sat beside him. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "My grandma kept ducks out back when I was little. Did I ever tell you that?" He looked at her. No. She used to say the first year always takes something from you, Diane said. She said that's how farming teaches you. Travis didn't respond, but something in his shoulders relaxed. 2 months in, the eggs began. Not many at first, then more. Then, by the 3rd month, they were collecting over 100 eggs a day. The first time Travis sold a flat of duck eggs at the Saturday farmers market in town, a woman picked one up, turned it over in her hand and said, "Where are these from?" "My farm," Travis said, "just outside of town." "Are they fresh?" "Laid this morning." She bought the whole flat. Travis stood at his table afterward and looked at the money in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was something he hadn't felt in a long time. Progress. And then the flood came. It came earlier than expected and harder than anyone in the county could remember in recent years. A slow-moving storm system stalled over the Gulf and dropped nearly a foot of rain in under a week. Within 4 days, the lower half of Travis's land was underwater, knee-deep in places, thigh-deep in others. Neighbors scrambled, cattle farmers faced disaster, hay bales were ruined, fences were swallowed, animals stood in mud, distressed, getting sick. The man who had shouted at Travis from across the field, the one who called him crazy, lost 5 of his cows in a single week, 2 to illness. 3 he had to haul off to auction at a severe loss before the water got any higher. He drove past Travis's farm one morning and slowed his truck. He stared. Travis's land completely flooded. And Travis's ducks. Thriving. They moved through the floodwater like it had been made for them, because, in a way, it had. The rising water had pushed insects, crawfish, small frogs, and aquatic life up from the soil a feast. The ducks ate and swam and ate again. Their weight was increasing. Their egg production had barely dipped. Travis stood at the edge of his flooded field in rubber boots, watching his ducks move through the brown water in the morning light, and he felt something he hadn't expected. He didn't feel relief. He felt vindicated. But here's the twist that even Travis didn't see coming. 3 days into the flood, a man named Dale knocked on Travis's front door. Dale ran a farm-to-table restaurant in the small city nearby, a place that prided itself on locally sourced ingredients for classic Southern dishes. He had heard through the farmer's market grapevine that Travis had ducks that were healthy, active, and producing eggs during the flood, when every other local supply had dried up. "I need eggs," Dale said simply, "as many as you can spare, and I need fresh duck, not frozen." "How much do you need?" Travis asked. Dale named a number. Travis blinked, then he turned to Diane, who was standing in the hallway behind him. She was already doing the math in her head. She nodded once. The weeks that followed looked like a different life. Every morning before dawn, Travis was out in the flooded fields, wading through knee-deep brown water in the gray pre-sunrise light. Fog hung low over the land. The ducks moved in loose clusters ahead of him, unhurried, completely at ease in conditions that had broken everything else around them. He would collect the eggs first, carried in plastic buckets, loaded carefully so nothing cracked. Then he'd check the birds, weight, feathers, any signs of illness. By the time the sun was fully up, Diane had the eggs washed, counted, and packed in flat cardboard trays lined with clean cloth. Their daughter had taken full ownership of the morning count. She had a little clipboard, a gift from her teacher, and she recorded the numbers every single day without being asked. She was 8 years old and running a mental spreadsheet with complete confidence. Dale's driver came every 2 days in a small refrigerated van. He'd back up to the yard gate, load the trays, leave a payment in an envelope, and be gone within 20 minutes. The envelope sat on the kitchen table each time, and Travis and Diane would open it together in the evenings slowly, like something ceremonial. The first payment was larger than anything they had seen from the farm in over 2 years. Diane stared at it for a long time. Then she looked up at her husband. "Travis," she said softly, "I think we're going to be okay." Outside, the flood was still rising. The sky was heavy and gray. The neighbor's pasture sat silent, empty, and ruined. And 200 ducks, 188 now but still, moved through the water without a care in the world. The flood lasted 31 days. By the time the water receded, Travis's farm had sold enough eggs and fresh duck to Dale's restaurant to fully repay his brother-in-law's loan. Let me say that again. In 31 days of flooding, while every cattle farmer in the parish was counting their losses, Travis paid off his debt. The day the last payment cleared, Travis sat at the kitchen table alone in the early morning. The house was quiet. The children were still asleep. Diane was out in the yard. He opened his old notebook to that first page, the one with 3 words at the top. "Something has to change." He stared at those words for a long time. Then he turned the page and wrote, "It changed." But the real climax, the moment that still gets to me when I think about it, happened a few weeks later. The neighbor, the one who had laughed, the one who had lost 5 cattle. He came to Travis's gate on a Tuesday morning, hat in hand, literally hat in hand, and stood there for a moment before he could bring himself to speak. "I heard what happened for you during the flood," the man said. His voice was low, not ashamed exactly, but humbled. "I heard," Travis said. The man looked at the ducks moving through the yard, then back at Travis. "I've got a low field," he said slowly. "Floods every single year. I've been fighting it my whole life. My daddy fought it too." He paused. "You think you could teach me about the ducks?" Travis looked at this man who had laughed at him, who had made his kids feel the sting of their father being mocked in public, and he felt no anger. He felt something quieter than that. He stepped aside from the gate. "Come on in," he said. "I'll put on some coffee." That conversation at the kitchen table became many conversations. Within a year, 3 neighboring farmers had started their own small duck operations, smaller than Travis's but growing. Travis became an informal resource in the community, not a consultant, not a teacher. He never called himself that. But people came to him with questions, and he always had time. Dale's restaurant expanded its menu and added a small line near the bottom of the chalkboard: eggs and duck sourced locally from Caldwell Farm. The first time Travis saw that sign, he stood in front of it for a full minute. Diane had to touch his arm to get him moving again. By the second year, they had expanded from 188 birds to nearly 400. They brought on 2 part-time workers from the local area, both young men who had been struggling to find steady, reliable work. Their daughter put together a school project on sustainable duck farming and won a regional 4-H agriculture award. She presented it in front of a panel of adult judges and didn't flinch once. She is, without question, her father's daughter. And Travis, he still gets up before sunrise. He still wades through his fields in rubber boots. He still writes in notebooks, though it's not the same one anymore. That first one filled up long ago. He keeps them stacked on a shelf in the back room now. He doesn't talk much about what he went through. Not the fear, not the sleepless nights, not the way his stomach dropped every time he heard another person laugh. But sometimes, when a young farmer comes to him with an unconventional idea, something the neighbors would shake their heads at, Travis listens very carefully. And then he always says the same thing. Tell me more. There's something that's been sitting with me since I first heard Travis's story. It's not really about ducks. It never was. It's about the fact that the very thing that was seen as Travis's weakness, the low land, the flooding, the fact that he couldn't hold on to cattle the way his neighbors did, turned out to be his greatest advantage. He just had to stop trying to fight it. He had to stop trying to be what everyone expected him to be, and start being honest about what his land and his situation actually was. The town laughed. They laughed because they were looking at the ducks. Travis was looking at the flood. I think about how many times in life we spend our energy fighting the flood, trying to hold back the thing we're afraid of, the thing we didn't plan for, the thing that doesn't look like success, when sometimes the flood is exactly what we need. Sometimes the thing everyone else calls a disaster is your invitation. You just have to be the kind of person who notices. Engagement prompt read warmly personally. If this story touched something in you, I'd really love to know. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are more stories like this one, stories about quiet people doing extraordinary things, and I don't want you to miss them. And before you go, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me which part of this story stayed with you the most. Was it Travis standing at the edge of his flooded field, watching his ducks thrive while his neighbor's pastures went under? Was it Diane saying, "I think we're going to be okay"? Was it the neighbor showing up at the gate with his hat in his hand? Whatever it was, I genuinely want to hear it. I read as many comments as I possibly can. And these stories, they only mean something because you're here to receive them. Take care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next one.